Hey everyone, it's the Snowman with TooLoud2OldMusic.com. Welcome back to the collection. And this week we are proud to have back on the show Mr. Tim Durling from Tim's Vinyl Confessions. Hey Tim, how are you?
I'm doing really good, John. Thanks for having me back on.
Oh, I appreciate it. I really enjoyed the first interview we did with your book for YNT. Down for the count. Let's get a picture where it doesn't get a glare. But this time I wanted to talk to you about the very first book you did. It's Unspooled, an adventure in 8 tracks. Because who doesn't love 8 tracks? And
Well,
I
yeah,
actually have two
who in their right
copies.
mind would do a book on 8 tracks, is
Yeah,
what you're trying
I
to
have two
say.
copies. I have an original pressing from when you started this. You did it on Kickstarter, if I'm not
Yep.
mistaken.
Yes.
Yeah. And tell me a little bit about that. I mean, getting it started.
So the idea for this book, um, well, the germ of the idea, John, has been in the back of my mind for decades. I mean, it really has. But on a practical level, early, I want to say early two. Boy, the last few years are such a blur. But I want to say early. I can't remember if it was 2021 or 2022, but it's researchable on my channel. The very first time that I had Martin Popoff on, who I've been a fan of his books for a long, long time. I bought his very first book, so I got to know Martin because we both appeared on an episode of the Rush Fans podcast, and so I once we did that, I thought, well, if I'm going to have him on, I'm going to message him now while he remembers who I am, or And he got right back to me, and I said, Martin, I would like to talk to you about 8 track tapes because I knew he had a couple. I don't think he's a big collector, but I knew he had a couple, and I wanted to know what he remembered about 8 tracks in terms of when you stopped seeing them in stores. That's that's an area that I wanted to know more about,
Okay.
and because most people, I think, equate if they, if they're of an age, if they know what they are at all. But if they're of a certain age, they probably think of them as from the 70s,
I I
being
basically
a
did. I grew
70s
up with them.
medium
Yeah.
of music, right? Um, and That's probably about it. But in the mid 90s, um, I discovered a website. I mean, this is when the internet was, to
In
the
its
average
infancy.
person, kind of in
Yeah.
its infancy, right? But I was always curious about that because I was collecting them at this point, and at that point, the most recent 8 track I had was Journey's Escape from 1981, and I got thinking, well, when did they actually stop making these things? Because I'm I was born in '74, so I remember 8 tracks when they were when they were in stores vaguely, like just vaguely. And I remember having like older cousins that had things like the Cars and Blondie and I think ACDC Back in Black. First time I ever heard that was on 8 track, and Queen, The Game. So turn of the 80s, basically, right?
Right.
But then all of a sudden, everybody that was sort of in my family even stopped buying vinyl, and everybody was buying cassettes
Yeah.
that I knew of until CDs came around. But I mean, I didn't get a CD player until 1990, so it was everybody I knew was buying cassettes. The only time in my family that we still got records of was at Christmas time. We dig out the Christmas records, right? So in 95, 96, I find a website called 8 Track Heaven. Now, 8 Track Heaven still exists, 8trackhheaven.com, but it's in archived form. It's not active anymore, but you can still look at it, what it used to look like. Anyway, 8trackhheaven.com, I looked at that and I found a section that changed something inside my brain. And the section was called the 80s only, or the 80s Club, Record Club only 8 tracks. That is when I discovered that in the United States, Columbia House, everybody knows Columbia House,
Yeah.
made certain titles available on 8 track until 1988.
Nine.
And
See, that blew my mind when I saw
Like,
that in the
it
book.
blew my mind. I was like, are you kidding me?
Yeah,
Now they didn't have a lot of pictures. There were a lot of listings, but there weren't a lot of pictures. Some people did submit pictures, and there were enough
but
to
there's the
really
book.
get me interested. So yeah, so there, what you're seeing is a spread from the book. That's an old Columbia House ad from a magazine circa 1988. And that just blew my mind. And one of the first things that I saw was a picture of George Harrison's Cloud Nine album on 8 track. And I thought, that came out in 1987. This is like less than 10 years at this point that I'm seeing this. I'm like, there are 8 tracks from 1987? Like, and then I saw one of David Lee Roth, Eat 'Em and Smile, one I'd actually like to have. I still don't have it.
You still don't have it? Okay.
And I thought, okay, so that's when I realized that there's an entire subsection of albums and formats that is like under the radar and that nobody talks about
Right.
unless you're on these very specified fan sites. And so I'm relaying this to Martin, and he says, somebody ought to do a book on this. And so I thought, okay, if Martin Popoff thinks that there's a good book idea here, there must be a good book idea here. So I had to think about that for a while. And
Okay.
so at this point, I talked to my one of my oldest friends, Matt Phillips from Go North Design. You'll see his logo on the back of the book. Um, and I told him what my idea was, and he said, "Yeah, okay, let's do it." And I couldn't have done it without him. You know, he designed the book cover. It looks amazing. He laid it all out. It's
Yeah,
just
it's beautiful.
such a
It's another great cover.
professional. It's such a professional
Yeah.
looking book. The way the chapters are all laid out. And another thing that Martin suggested is adding the stories. All I wanted to do was have a book like a reference book where I went year by year, starting in 1981, going through 1988, and listing all of the known RCO record club only 8 tracks, not just with Columbia House, but also with RCA Music Service, which later became BMG Music Service. They're lesser known than Columbia House,
Right.
but a lot of people were, part of that club too. So, and the reason I started in 1981 or wanted to start in 1981 is because 1981 seems to be the first year that there were 8 tracks that didn't have retail 8 track or counterparts. And once you start studying these things, you'll see they look very, very different. Like something that was meant for retail looks way different than something that was a record club. There's a distinct look, and the record clubs tend to have their own look, and they look very generic no matter what label they were on.
Right.
So I just wanted to have a list of all of the known 8 tracks. There's many as that I could find that I could confirm actually existed. And quite rightly, Martin said that might be kind of dry. That might make for some dry reading. And he said, why don't you talk to some collectors? And they don't necessarily have to be 8 track collectors. And that set the whole thing in motion. And what I ended up with was it's still a reference book. I still stand behind it because it's accurate as to the best of my abilities. I didn't put any titles in there that were rumored, you know.
Right.
So every chapter at the end, every chapter is a year, and at the end of each chapter, there's a list of all these album titles and the label they're on. Those all exist on 8 track, every single one of them, and some of them you may look at and go, that's on 8 track. So yeah, that's and it ended up being the coolest. I got so many cool stories from people about collecting and that thrill of collecting because
Right.
a lot of people collect something, whether it's hockey cards or action figures or Star Wars stuff or Lego or you know, I just happen to have this. And it isn't so much that I have this fascination with collecting 8 tracks. It's just that when I like an album and I like a group or whatever, I want to have all the formats.
Right.
Now,
I'm with you there.
I have to say that when I say all the formats, I realize there are other formats. There's reel to reel, which I don't have any of those.
Those are real,
That's
and I mean, those are so hard to come by.
Well, and they're expensive. They're
Expensive. Yeah.
still, if you go on eBay, like I've seen, I'll see Alice Cooper and Kiss and Aerosmith. They're all $250 starting
Yeah.
out, right? So they just haven't gotten to a point where they're affordable. And there's also those mini discs. Remember the mini discs that came out?
Yeah, I actually have
And then
one, I think.
in the early 90s, they had those digital. Polygram had the digital compact cassettes, little tiny cassettes that would look like they'd go in an answering machine.
Yeah.
There's a
I
few of those from a very small window of time. So I don't have any of those either, but 8 tracks, that's attainable. But, so I like a band that started in the 70s, for example, but at the end, there'll be 2 or 3 that weren't released to stores. Well, I want to try and find those too. And
right.
those are these RCOs, these record club only 8 tracks. And it blossomed into this amazing looking book that, um, I'm very, very proud of it. Initially, yeah, it was a Kickstarter campaign. The, the amount of response we got to the Kickstarter campaign was mind blowing. I didn't know how many people would be interested in this. It wasn't the easiest thing to market because it's really hard to explain exactly what the book is about. It's like
It is super niche, and
you got to look at it is niche within niche. I mean,
yeah,
it is uber niche.
it
It
is.
is so it is so very niche, right? It's a niche topic within a niche topic within a niche topic.
But
But
it's
the
interesting.
fact that it's done as well as it has tells me there's other people out here interested in this, and it has raised awareness that people are, wow, I just did not know that some of these later 80s albums were made on 8 track in any format whatsoever.
Yeah, I learned so much from this. I think there was an interview you did with was it Kathy Gibson?
Yes, Kathy Gibson from Kate's Track Shack. Yes, that was a
That was
great
just
interview with Kathy.
that was
Yes.
so informative. It was just,
Yeah.
they take them and they fix them and refurbish them, and it
Coffee
was
can tapes.
it was crazy. And I
Tape
had no
runs
idea that
everywhere.
there was
People
a group.
put it in a can and take it to them and say, "Can you fix this, please?"
Yeah.
And they got to re-spool them. And yeah, and there is a section, later on in the book where I wanted to have some 8 tracks that, album covers people would recognize
Right.
from the later 80s. And these are all real. So you got Prince and Michael Jackson and Madonna and Cyndi Lauper, like the biggest names in 80s music. They have 8 tracks.
And are all of these pictures in here, are they yours?
No,
Okay.
I had a good friend of mine donate these photos to me, and I haven't talked to him in such a long time. Sterling Charles. Sterling Charles, he goes by the name um something retrograde on Instagram. That's how I discovered. He's got a ton of these.
Okay.
Now, these layouts, those are all mine.
Those are
A
all
lot
yours.
of them are mine.
Okay.
Like a lot of these are mine. But
Okay.
so the Kickstarter campaign went really well. And then when Amazon, I got to bring another well-known author into this because he turned the tide for making this available again. Julian Gill. Anybody who's a big Kiss fan knows Julian Gill from the
I've
Kiss.
got a bunch of his. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, Julian's done he does great niche Kiss books, like he did the Odyssey book on the Elder.
Yeah.
And there's more recent one, Mask Hysteria, which talks all about the period from between 79 and 81. I'm fascinated by those periods in the band's career.
Yeah.
And that was an Amazon published book. So
Okay.
got in touch with them and said, Julian, how did you make this happen? Because, the Kickstarter campaign was great, but it was literally getting boxes and boxes of books sent because we had all of these different levels of, if you got this, then you get this, and then you get a tote bag, and then you get a pin, and then and so that was all like putting together by hand, right? And then taking them, shipping them, and paying for the shipping. And I'm not complaining, but it was a lot of work. Now, Amazon, you send them the stuff and it's done. And so the second edition came out last fall, and it's available again, and it's also updated. It's also updated because since I published the first edition, there were about 24 more 8 tracks that not popped up, but I discovered actually existed. So I added those to the year-end list, and there were also a couple that I had to take out from both from 1982. I'll tell you what they were. One was Alan Parsons' Project Eye in the Sky, and the other one was the band 707 and their album Megaforce.
Okay, so they were available retail after all.
Both of those came out as retail, so that takes them out of this book. That is not what, because somebody asked me, how come Kiss Creatures of the Night isn't in here? Because that was released to retail. It's rare as hen's teeth, but it was released to retail. So that is why. These are ones that are strictly RCO. So yeah, I mean, we got, Mike Ladano's in here. He contributed a very, very funny story about being a youngster and basically mistaking what the inside of a tape was made of and thinking you could eat it. um,
Yeah.
and yeah, it turned out amazingly well, and the response was great. So and it really it bothered me uh, when after we sold out of what we had printed up. I've still had people once in a while, hey, where can I get this? Where can I get this?
Right.
And so I was really happy to make it available again.
Yeah, and when you did, I had to get another one. So I just loved each chapter starts with a 8-track with a picture of you on it as a
Yeah,
kid, and you
I
tell a
wanted to.
story.
Yeah, I wanted to have a little bit of a personal touch in there, not too much because who cares about me, but all of these pictures are from the years,
Yeah.
from the years indicated, right? I wanted them to look like an 8-track. Each chapter is broken up into 4 sub chapters. And anybody that remembers the big 8-track stereo system will know that they lit up. And when you were on a program, that program was lit up. And then when you switched programs, the next one lit up. And that's how we have the setup. So
Oh,
when you go to
okay.
chapter 2, it's lit up. And then the 3 is lit up. So
That's right. I
that
forgot
that's
about
just a
that.
little that's just a little bit, a
Yeah.
little bit of extra they threw in there for people that would remember such things. But there's things on maintenance here, and there's things about how they actually worked, and some of the links that you had to go to find them before the advent of eBay and Discogs and
Yeah.
Facebook groups that specialize in these.
Right. I know you got me one from one of your contacts that I
Yes.
love. You helped me get this one.
Yep.
Aldo
And
Nova's debut album.
and you got a nice so what he's got there, folks, that's a US Columbia House version, and it's a blue cartridge.
Yeah, I'm trying to get it open. It
It's
is,
actually a blue cartridge, and that differs from mine because mine is not.
yeah, look at that.
But yet it's the same pressing, and it probably looks exactly the same. Yeah.
I love how all my copies have that ripple effect on the label.
That is one of the hardest things to not happen to an 8-track. If you see one that doesn't have that, it was well taken care of. But
Or it's a
that would
fake.
happen if they were left in a truck window or in the sun or just wear and tear. And that's why, like, people do. Unfortunately, you're going to get this type of person. People do make counterfeit ones,
Right.
ones that are not ones that are clearly made up ones. Like if someone puts a Taylor Swift album on an 8-track, well, that never existed. But when
Well,
someone makes one to look like one that does exist,
this is
yeah,
a
there you
brand
go.
new one.
Yeah, that's awesome. But
Yes.
there are people that would take, there are some highly collectible ones. Let's say, for example, Motley Crue, Shout at the Devil.
Oof.
I know people are out there going, what? Yes, Motley
Yeah.
Crue, Shout at the Devil. There's a Motley Crue 8-track. That's the only one that I know of that was made, but it's available through Columbia House or RCA Music Service. That goes for 600 plus when one becomes
They did
available.
that
So
one.
people make fake ones up.
They didn't do one for the debut, just for Shout at the Devil.
There doesn't seem to be.
Okay.
There doesn't seem to be. And that's another gray area that I try to talk about. Sometimes there are missing ones, like Rat, for example. Their EP is available on 8-track.
Ooh.
Invasion of Your Privacy is available on 8-track. Out of the Cellar doesn't seem to exist.
And it was a big seller.
And it was the biggest seller. So and guys, maybe it does, but I'm not going to say it does because I've never seen proof of it. I
Right.
have to see it
Right.
because I do not want misinformation spread. So anyway, people will go to ones like this, these highly collectible ones, and they'll try to recreate them. But one thing that's almost impossible to recreate is that rippling effect, that aged effect. Because why would you do that on purpose, right?
Right.
How could you do that on
Right.
purpose?
And
Uh,
yeah, they're not going to be perfect. I can't imagine. I mean, I'm looking at the few I do have, and every single one has a little bubble.
yeah,
Well,
That's just, you know,
this one
that's
doesn't.
another,
This one
wow,
is
that's in really good shape too.
that's in
Yeah.
really good. It's really good
Yeah.
shape.
Yeah.
So
So, you know, another thing I think that might account for that, John, is the fact that eight tracks didn't really have a protective case. At most, all they had was a slipcase, but
they
it was
had this
still
paper
open.
sleeve. Yeah.
Yeah, but for the most part, there wasn't anything to protect them from the elements. And you know, they're also unique in that you couldn't look at the credits while you're listening to them because half of it was stuck in the machine. You know, and that goes back to why they were popular in the first place, because now they would seem like the most impractical things. But it was one of the first times that you could listen to the music that you wanted to listen to in a portable format in a vehicle. You could put a
Right.
tape deck in your vehicle and you could listen to whatever you wanted to listen to. um that's really what won out, because you couldn't listen to a record in a car.
No.
um there were cassettes, but my understanding is that, as funny as this might sound, eight tracks were of better construction than the early cassettes. They lasted better.
Yeah. Well, my mom's she had an Oldsmobile Cutlass. Or I
Hmm.
think it was orangish, brownish. It was ugly, but it had an 8-track player.
Yeah,
And to get it to play the an 8-track properly, I had to fold up some aluminum foil and slide it underneath to like lift it up to make it play properly.
I a lot of people told me they used to use matchbooks
Oh, that would have
or
worked.
a
Yeah.
popsicle stick
Yeah.
or a penny. Yeah, you know, they weren't built to last. And the way that they work, the innards of them is a very strange process. And I think that's one of the things I'm so proud, that's so funny to me, that you have them existing as long as they did, because they it doesn't make any sense for these albums that came out in 86, 87, 88 to it makes no sense to coexist alongside CDs, and yet
CDs.
they
Yeah.
it's the out of time factor that's one of the fascinating things. Even though I lived through the 8-track era, obviously I grew up through the 80s. I'm a child of the 80s and I listened to the radio and I bought cassettes, and this went right by me. Of course, I wasn't in the States either. It's my understanding, near as I can tell, Columbia House, there was a Columbia House in Canada as well. They seemed to stop in 1984. So they did go beyond retail. And it's generally understood that retail 8 tracks, you might as well say, ended in 1982,
Okay. Yeah.
even
See,
though there were about a half a dozen manufactured in 1983. But those are,
yeah.
you know,
Yeah. I just
you
don't
just didn't
remember.
see them. Stores just didn't, they didn't carry them anymore. They put them all in a dump bin, and they just had records and tapes, right? Until
Right.
CDs came along.
Yeah. I know. I remember when the CDs came along, I had a section about this big of CDs, and then everything else was vinyl and cassettes. But I still don't remember seeing these. But my brothers had them because he
Yeah.
had Kiss ones. There was a band called Shark that he had one of theirs. I remember it because I just thought Shark was a cool name and everything. You know, when you're 6, it's like, "Ooh, Shark, I'll
Was it
take
Shark or Sharks?
Shark."
Just Shark. Okay.
Well, it might be an S on it. I don't know. I don't really
Well, because
remember the
I know
band's name.
that Andy Fraser, who was the bassist in Free, was in a band called Sharks after Free.
And it could be them. I
So I
just
don't know if that's it or
yeah,
not, but
but it's just I always found it odd too that occasionally, well, the track listing sometimes would be different.
exactly,
And then you'd get the
exactly.
fade out,
Hmm.
click, fade back in of songs when it went to the next track. So it wasn't the
That's
most
one of the
practical.
that's one of the main things that people remember um, from that time. And yeah, there's a reason for the mixed up song track listings. But the first thing I want to show you, the only Canadian Columbia House 8-track I have that's RCO.
Okay.
And this is probably one I paid a lot of money for. So
Oh
Rush,
man.
Grace Under Pressure.
Yeah.
So this is on Anthem Records. So because if this was in the States, it'd be on Mercury.
Right.
So that's in really good shape. Like
That
there's no
really
bubbling
is.
on this whatsoever. But even this is mixed up in its uh it just barely.
Barely. Yeah.
So the songs are mixed up. The reason that the songs were mixed up faded out, sometimes repeated. You have 4 stereo tracks. So I think that's why they're called 8 tracks, because you get left and right side times 4. I think that's why they're called 8 tracks. It gets confusing because you hear talk about people in recording studios. Yeah, we had an 8-track recorder. That doesn't mean they had an 8-track player.
Right.
That means they had the big reels and, that was recording tape. But each of those 4 programs, the labels or the manufacturers tried to keep them as equal length as possible.
Right.
So that there weren't a lot of space at the end of one of the programs, because one quirk about these things, you couldn't rewind them. You could only fast forward. And if there was, a lot of space at the end of a program and you just advance to the next program, let's say that a program's length is, 9.5 minutes, and a song ends and it's like 7.5 minutes into that program, and you click to the next program, you're not at the beginning of the next program. You're 7.5 minutes into that next program. It's wherever you are in terms of where the tape is. So if you wanted to get to the first of it, you had to fast forward. And then when that stopped, then you hit the next program, and then you hear whatever song you wanted to hear. So if you were lucky, you got something that was close to the right track listing. But there are some cases where the track listings are absolutely mangled.
Right.
So for example, look at this one here. Okay. This is one of the first, and this is one that I actually, when I first bought this, probably about 16 years ago, this was one of the first really rare ones that I found on eBay, and it wasn't that expensive, so I had to get it because it's one of
Yeah.
my favorite bands.
Oh.
But
Uh,
the crazy thing about this is this actually exists in a retail form.
okay.
It was one of the very last ones made. So this came out January 20th, 1983, I think. I think what happened was this album was probably supposed to be released in October of '82, and in typical Def Leppard Mutt Lange fashion, it
It
was
took
pushed
forever.
back. But they had already had the 8-track manufactured for it. So, I've seen it come up for sale once in a while, and I thought, oh boy, that's a lot of money. And I thought, you know what, I'm happy with this one. This is a Columbia House one, and a lot of the Columbia House ones will have this blue
The
square around it so that they all kind of look the same. I think your Aldo Nova one has the same thing too. It doesn't matter what originating label it is either. They're all kind of made to look like they would have been on CBS, because Columbia House was a division of CBS Records. So most people know the track listing on Pyromania. I'm
yes.
just going to read it how it is on here. It's not bad. I've seen worse, but it is
Okay.
out of order. So Rock Rock Till You Drop, Photograph, Die Hard the Hunter,
Okay.
Begin.
That's very strange.
So we're off now, right? So
Yeah.
Program 2's Die Hard the Hunter, Conclusion, Stage Fright, and Too Late for Love.
Okay.
Program 3's Foolin' Rock of Ages, Coming Under Fire, Begin. Program 4 is Coming Under Fire, Conclusion, Action Not Words, Billy's Got a Gun. Not bad.
Right.
Not bad.
The first half is a little messed
The
up.
first half's a little bit screwed up. So that is for to keep those programs around the same length.
Right.
And obviously that's not something that you had to worry about with any other media.
No.
Live albums, they tended to leave alone for some reason, but you'd also have more breaks.
Right.
The breaks were kind of, so the song would, like, when I say break, I mean what would happen is you'd be listening to a song, and all of a sudden the volume will start to go down right in the middle of the song or at some point in the song, and then it clicks and goes to the next program, and then it fades back in. So I think they did it so that you actually didn't miss any of the song, but again, the portability won out. It wasn't the best listening experience, right? It was for driving around, and then sometimes you'd get a case where if there was enough space at the very end, they'd repeat a song. And if you were lucky, they'd repeat a song that had been cut, chopped in half,
Right.
and you'd listen to it whole. I know Aerosmith's Greatest Hits is like that. For example, Walk This Way is split between 2 of the programs, but then on the last program, it's in full.
Oh, okay.
Silly things like that, right? Makes no sense.
No. Not at all. No. So.
Well, I did dig some of my more prized possessions out to talk about.
Oh yeah, I want to see those for sure.
I was more than happy to help you find that Aldo Nova one, because that's I know that's that's a great album. and actually the seller that had that. So I got you that first one,
Right.
and I was able to get Subject from him, which is really hard to find.
That's the other one because those are the
Yeah,
only two on Aldo
those are the only two. Okay, so
that
this
we
is
know
another
about.
good point. This is another good point because there's a chapter in my book which I actually call fantasy, and the reason I called it that was because there are things that don't make sense because if they made 8 tracks all the way up until 1988, what was the criteria for the albums that did make it onto that format? I don't know the answer to that, which is why to this day I'd love to talk to someone that worked at Columbia House and talked to that had, where was the decision making, and why did you finally decide to stop? What was it that said, okay, we're
Yeah.
good,
Yeah.
we're good? Um, because let's take Aldo Nova for example. So Aldo Nova, as we know, was on Portrait CBS. So for CBS, Columbia has to put up CBS artists. That's really easy. Like that's a no-brainer, right? There's no negotiating with another label. Now we all know that his 1985 album Twitch was not successful. But you don't know an album's not successful until after it's been out. So why doesn't that exist on 8-track? And here's the thing, it could, but I'm not going to say that it does
Right. Because you've
until
just
I've
never
seen
seen it. Yeah.
it. Def Leppard's a good example. Does Hysteria exist on 8-track? There are 8 tracks from 1987, but I don't think so. And so in this chapter, I list some examples of 8 tracks that could conceivably exist within that time frame. But I give reasons why they could exist, and I give reasons why they probably don't exist. And in the case of Hysteria, it's because by 1987, what Columbia House and RCA Music Service were concentrating on, for the most part, musically, were either superstar pop acts or country.
Country is Reba was like in every year.
Listen, if you were a country music fan, you did not have to change your format all the way through 1988. Every George Strait album, every Alabama album, every Reba album, every Kenny Rogers album, Waylon Jennings, they just kept putting them out on 8-track. I mean, even as recent somebody like Randy Travis. I mean, his first 3 albums are on 8-track. So there is something to be said for the idea of the 8 tracks and the pickup trucks. There
Right.
really is. It's not just a cliche.
Yeah.
So that's why it amazes me when I find rock bands in these formats during this time. For example,
Oh, wow.
Night Ranger
Nice.
7 Witches from 1985. And again, both of these are on different labels. I mean, this is
But they look
Mercury
the same.
Polygram, this is MCA, and they both look like they would have come out on CBS Records
Yeah.
because they're just made to look generic like that. Now they're not RCOs, but they're 2 of my prized possessions, and I've got to talk about them.
Oh, yeah. I saw those are in your book.
Yeah, these are funny ones because these came with slip cases, and the slip cases happen to be intact because they tended to get thrown away because these are runs of them that didn't have the cover art on the tape itself.
Oh,
These are
okay.
what I call naked 8 tracks. You'll see a lot of these if you're looking at used thrift stores or whatever, right? You might see a lot like this.
Right.
These aren't fake. These are real 8 tracks, legit ones. It's just that the slip cases got chucked out.
Okay.
Yeah, they came in slip cases like a DVD or Blu-ray would come in. No
Nice.
different. But the artwork was only on these. Sometimes they were on both. But to my knowledge, these are the only Y&T 8 tracks. To
Wow.
my knowledge. Now you might be saying, well, wait a second. I've seen Styx. I've seen 38 Special from 81, 82. So why wouldn't Y&T be? Well, here's the thing. I can't say for sure that, say, Earthshaker, Black Tiger didn't get produced on 8-track. Like I don't know why they wouldn't, because if an album comes out, you put it out on whatever formats you put them out on. So I don't know. The only thing that I know of that came out on 8-track with Y&T's shortened name is a K-Tel various artists tape called Masters of Metal Volume 1 that came out in 1983. It's got Mean Streak on it. It's got a lot of other great songs on it too. It's actually a really good.
I
It's got
think I
Doc and
have that one.
Piss and Dio, and
Yeah,
you do have that
I have that one on vinyl.
on vinyl. Yeah,
Yeah,
that exists on 8 track. So as far as I know, that's the only Y&T track that exists under the name Y&T.
very nice.
So if I saw that somewhere, I'd get it just for
Just for
that.
that.
But yeah, when you get later on into the 80s, it's a crapshoot, right? I've done all right. Like I've got, I've done pretty good. Now this one is an RCA Music Service one.
38 special. Yeah.
38 special strength. This is from 1986. This is
Wow.
the last known one of theirs. So you can see the RCA Music Service ones look quite different. Now let's go to 1986 for an album that, as we're filming this, is just celebrating an anniversary.
Oh, okay. 5150.
Now this one's really weird because
It's a half and
each
half.
each half of are colored differently. They must have come to the end of one run, and
I've
you'll see
never
if you
seen
like
that
this once in a
before.
while. You'll see if you like this once in a while. That's the last Van Halen one.
Wow.
What did Sammy Hagar do in between that album and OU812? He did this in
Very
1987 on
so,
Geffen.
so is 87. Do you have one? Any from 88?
I have one.
You have one. Okay.
One of the last ever produced. At the time I did the book up, I didn't have this. I now have it.
Journey. Wow.
Journey's Greatest
Greatest.
Hits. November 15th, 1988.
See, and
Look how small the printing had gotten at that point.
I would have never thought that would be on 8-track.
So this is the crazy thing about it, John. Like I said, my 8-track collection started with Escape. I found Escape for $1 in 1990. I was a huge Journey fan then, and I listened to the greatest hits all the time. And if you'd have told me just 2 years prior, like, this would have blown my little mind.
Yeah.
I had no idea that would have existed on 8-track, and it doesn't make any sense for it to exist. So there was this one in Fleetwood Mac's greatest hits with the green cover. I don't have that one. Those are the last two known to be produced.
Okay.
And like I said, why did they get that far and then say, okay, we're not going to do this anymore?
Yeah.
So those 8 tracks that came out in the lower half of 1988, those are ones that command some big prices, like U2, Rattle and Hum.
Okay.
Yeah, there's just a handful of them, but the fact that they exist at all, I mean, when if they, 1988, would there be a Winger 8-track, or could there, a Guns N' Roses 8-track? It's just, it's crazy. And by putting all the known ones down, I kind of feel like I accomplished something. It's like, any part of music history, and this is a very small part of music history, but it should all be documented.
Right.
So
And
that's
I think
one of the things I wanted to do.
You did a fantastic job. To me, it is an interesting read. Like I said, I learned so much about 8-tracks and stuff, and it just boggled my mind that some of these would be on an 8-track. And
but what I think I like to think that I did with this book is you would have no interest in collecting these things at all. But I hope I put something together that it was at least an interesting read. It's a coffee table book, I think. It's a coffee table book, or I've heard people call it a bathroom reader. I've called it that myself. That is not an insult. It's a book you can just pick up at any point in the book. You don't necessarily have to read it from front to back, and you can pick it up, read a chapter, and put it back down. And that's what I tried to do. But for those that were interested in this, I really wanted to have something that was accurate and get people thinking about, wow, I never, most people think, I wouldn't even think to look for some of these albums in this format. And the thing is, unless you happen upon an estate sale or something like that, you are highly unlikely to come across any of these in the wild.
The
what you're going to
RCO
come
ones
across,
especially.
what you're going to come across are 70s ones. Like, there are certain ones that you see all the time, right? You tend to see a lot of country, you see a lot of easy listening, you see a lot of disco ones, you see a lot of various artist ones. You see a lot of fake, you see a lot of like truck stop ones, like fake ones that'll have a generic photo on the front and it'll say Deep Purple Burn, but it's not real. You know what I mean? Like, so look for a record label on it. And that's another thing about these ones that I call the naked 8-tracks, that are absolutely legit, because you look on this, and it's on London Records, it's real. Just doesn't have any artwork on it.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think the oldest I've found a few since I mean, I've actually always been looking because I'm a Kiss collector, so I want all the
Right.
Kiss stuff.
Yes,
But
exactly.
after reading the book, I if I actually saw something out in the wild, I would that was interesting, I would grab it. I got like AC/DC's High
Yep.
Voltage, but none of these are, record clubs. I got Styx,
Yep.
and I found another Styx,
Yep.
and then I got this Aerosmith one. This was the last big run that I actually got some stuff.
That's cool. Yeah. That
Um,
looks different than my Night in the Ruts because mine's Canadian. They look totally different.
oh, okay. But I mean,
Yeah.
it is so rare to find a regular rock act in
Yes.
any of my local stores, and I think I found these at a antique mall and some guy's booth. Yeah.
Yeah. When I in the early 90s when I first started looking, there were certain ones that you would almost be guaranteed to see. First Boston, um, because that was such a big selling album, right?
Yeah.
And you'd see Don't Look Back almost as much. Kansas Leftovers, Point of No Return. I've had I don't know how many copies of those, but those are both big selling albums too.
Yeah.
But you mentioned Kiss. Like, yes, okay, so this is a funny one because the Kiss collectors, well, I have Julian Gill, the great Julian Gill contributes a chapter to this. We know Kiss collectors are crazy because
Yes.
we're Kiss collectors.
Yes. We're nuts.
So if you're a Kiss collector, then you don't necessarily have to be an 8-track collector. You just want all things Kiss.
Yeah.
And that means that eventually you're going to stumble upon the fact that Lick It Up and Animalize were made by Columbia House on 8-track. Now, I don't have those. I don't have
Right.
Creatures of the Night either. Those are the three that I'm missing. I've got them from the first album through The Elder. Now, The
Hmm.
Elder's not easy to find either, but I do have The Elder on 8-track.
Okay.
Creatures of the Night is even more rare. I have never even seen one come up for sale. To my knowledge, it was only released to retail. It is like ridiculously rare. There's a really nice picture of one on Discogs that somebody has. It's flawless. There's not a ripple in it. And Lick It Up and Animalizer on there too. That's another one I talk about in my chapter. Why isn't Asylum on 8-track? It could have
Right.
been. It could have
Should have
been
been.
given other bands of that type that were on 8-track, but it doesn't seem to be. You
Right.
mentioned Aerosmith. The one with the hard one to find with Aerosmith is Done with Mirrors.
Which I love that album. Yeah.
Yeah, but that came out on 8-track. That's the last known one. With Styx, for example, so all the way up through Paradise Theater were retail. So you've got to go to the RCOs to get Kilroy Was Here and then the live album Caught in the Act. And if you're really a diehard, you'll want to get Tommy Shaw's Girls with Guns and Dennis DeYoung's Desert Moon, both on 8-track. So I'm telling you, once you start, it's like it is the I wouldn't wish it on anybody. Like for example, as rare as this is, it's not the end because Power Windows came out on 8-track too.
Oh,
And
okay.
that's never so it's not a matter of well, how much is it worth? I don't know. I've never seen one come up for sale. It's
Right.
there are these rarefied ones. The one, but it's been about 6 years now, John. The one that blew my mind that I had no idea this band would have had an 8-track is the first Bon Jovi album.
Wow. Do you have it?
And no, I was chatting with someone who had one to sell,
Oh,
and we were bartering back and forth with money. He wanted 350 US for it.
whoa.
Here's the crazy part, John. I was thinking about it,
Oh, I'm sure.
but what snapped me out of it was that when he said it had no back on it, it just had the front sticker. So it would have been one of those ones that looked like this with the blue bar around it,
Right.
but it had no. So immediately I was like, no,
No, it's not.
thanks, but no thanks.
Yeah, it needs to be better if you're going to pay that much money. Heck,
Yeah,
I'm still missing
but
the
I but I
Kiss
remember
Symphony.
when I first saw that, I was like, I have lived to Bon Jovi 8-track. Like I did not think that that would be a thing. But I mean, it is crazy. I mean, Richard Marx's first album was on 8-track.
Wow. I wouldn't
Like
mind. I've got a
artists
bunch
that
of his stuff.
artists that didn't start in the 70s and were still, artists that were brand new
Yeah,
in that latter half of the 80s, they've got 8 tracks.
that's crazy.
So it's yeah, it's pretty nuts. Like Madonna, if anybody's a Madonna fan and they're die hard, well, all of hers came out in the RCO era. None of them were retail. But just so you've got her first album, Like a Virgin, True Blue, and then there's the You Can Dance, or You Can
You can
Dance. It's like a
dance.
remix album.
Yeah.
And I think the Who's That Girl track.
Wow.
So
That's a lot
so
more than
that's
I thought.
all available on 8 track, right? And if 8 track's been around another year, you'd have a Like a Prayer one. But so yeah, why did they finally stop? I don't know. I have to think it was costs, manufacturing costs. I don't know, because starting in 1986, and there's a thing showing this in the book. Starting in 1986, Columbia House ads would say compact discs now available. So
Right.
that means from 1986 through 1988, you had 4 choices. You
See,
had four choices
by
of
then I was
media.
picking CDs.
Right. I talked to a guy on Instagram who said his mother was in Columbia House in the 1980s. And he said that she kept forgetting to change her preference for media. And she kept getting these 8 tracks sent. And I remember saying, I bet you wish you'd still had them. And he said, yep.
Yep. Wow.
You'd have all these like Billy Ocean and, whatever was popular, like,
Yeah.
most pop music and a lot of soundtracks too. They all came out on 8 track. I mean, the Cocktail soundtrack came out on 8 track.
Oh, I'd
You know,
want the Vision Quest or something like that.
Vision Quest did. I mean, Top Gun. Yeah,
So,
it is crazy. I mean, you know, um, so it's about, for me, it's not collecting the 8 tracks themselves, because I mean, if I came across an Oak Boys one from '88, I'd be like, that's nice, but I don't care.
no, I'm the
I have
same
to
way.
like the art. I have to like the artist. It just so happens that there's, the nice thing is that there is a finite amount of them out there for me that I
Yeah.
would want. You know, I don't have a player for these, John. Why do I
I,
collect them? I don't know. I don't
I
know.
mean, I just
I
bought the new
can't
Collective
stop.
Soul. New Collective
Yeah,
Souls on 8 track. I don't have a
I know.
player either, but
I know.
I wanted it.
It's and I love that bands do that, and I love that bands are putting cassettes out again. I love that. It's as impractical as it gets,
Yep.
but when I see that, it's like, okay, I don't feel quite so alone, you know.
Yeah.
But and I do have, you mentioned the interview with Kathy. I do have that Cheap Trick one, the latest that came out in
You do have, I was
2009.
going to ask
Yeah,
because
yeah,
that came out in the 90s.
that came out in 2009.
It was a 2009. Oh, I was thinking it was like
2009.
99 or so.
No,
Um,
2009. They wanted to have the number one selling something the week the album came out.
so they did
So they
wow.
had an 8 track.
I would have bought it. I just didn't, I missed that completely. So,
Yeah, I was lucky enough to find one well after the fact, but that's actually not, that's not the rarest Cheap Trick 8 track, in my from my point of view, because there is still one I'm missing, and that's Next Position Please.
oh,
I
okay.
can't find that on an 8 track. That would be the only other one I'd need.
Okay.
Yeah, and
Well,
even Alice Cooper a few years ago, that when they did that reunion show, that Live at the AstroTurf, that came on an 8 track. I don't have that.
oh, I didn't see that being offered either. Darn.
Yeah, very limited. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's so yeah,
Oh,
it's fun, but it's maddening. And the thing is, and because these are so rare, people that have them know what they're worth.
right.
So you've got to be careful out there. And like I said, you're not likely to stumble upon these. To this day, the only 8 track I've ever found in the wild that's an RCO was Foreigner's Agent Provocateur.
Okay.
And I couldn't believe when I found that, because that's the newest one that I'd found. I found one from '84. So
Well, now I
um,
know to look for that blue ring because,
that means Columbia House.
yeah, I'm going to
Sometimes,
start looking
not
for it.
always, because by the time they got to like 87, 88, they were
They were
using
just
these
the
cream
white.
colored ones, right?
Okay.
And this Van Halen one, they couldn't decide, so they just used half.
Half of it. So, all right. Well, Tim, I want to thank you for spending some time with me. Do you have anything else you're working on yet that you
I
can talk
am
about?
working. Yeah, no, but not that I can talk about. I mean, I can do vague.
Yeah,
Yeah,
you can be vague.
I am working on another book.
Okay. All right, cool.
And
Time frame?
I'm not prepared to not time frame. I'm hoping by the summer. I'm hoping.
Oh, that's faster than I thought. Okay. I was
I'm
thinking end of
hopeful.
the year. All right, cool.
Well, definitely by the end of the year, but yeah, we'll see.
All right. Well, cool. Well, thanks again for joining us. I appreciate it. Everybody go out to Amazon, get Unspooled, an adventure in 8 tracks. And if while you're at it, you might as well pick up Down for the Count, the Y&T album review. I almost forgot the word there. Uh, I'll leave links down below. Please hit like and subscribe, leave a comments. I'll leave all of Tim's information down as well. And I think that's it. So thanks again, Tim. I really appreciate it. And we'll see everybody next week. Thanks a lot.
Thanks,
Bye.
John.